Mondays with Mo, we're going to be stepping into the boots, the leathers of a master thief in 2014's reboot of Thief. So Thief actually had a long and kind of difficult development cycle, but we'll get to that a little bit later on, because I actually want to start by talking about the one thing that Thief does spectacularly well, and that I think more games are starting to do, and that I want to see more games make basically mandatory, and that is its customizable difficulty and HUD options. As soon as you start a new game in Thief, you'll be able to choose from one of 3 difficulties, and you'll also be able to craft a custom difficulty that allows you to activate things like Iron Man mode. You can activate a no-kill mode that will actually end your game if you do get a kill. A lot of games just have that as an achievement, right? Like, oh, don't kill anyone in Dishonored, for example. But you could play through the entire game and make a mistake and not realize it, whereas Thief will just kind of kick you out of the game. It's a really great way to, number 1, make the game far more replayable, and number 2, allow people who really want to go all in on their first playthrough to craft that perfect hardcore playthrough, if you will. It is something that Dishonored's done with this difficulty. Arcane in general does a really good job with customizable difficulty in their games, but we're also seeing that in things like Sniper Elite 4. Sniper Elite 4 has a bonkers customizable difficulty option. You can change everything, make the game as easy or as hard or as mixed and matched as you want to. The same can be said for Assassin's Creed and basically all the Ubisoft games as of late, even Far Cry. These are games that are not just allowing you to modify the difficulty, but allowing you to additionally modify how the difficulty is influenced by disabling bits and pieces of your HUD, turning off all of those god-awful waypoint markers. Basically, more and more AAA games are doing a lot to cater to an audience that I frankly don't think really exists. An audience that is practically brain dead, right? Like, just point us where to go, tell us how to do everything, and they're stripping discovery, exploration out of so many of these great worlds that these developers are putting so much work and time and effort into. But they're slowly putting it back into the games, reintroducing that concept of discovery and exploration and player choice and player freedom and player discovery by giving us the option to turn off our HUDs, to turn off our minimaps, to disable all these breadcrumb quest trails. And it's amazing when a game does that. And I think we've reached a point where the first thing I do when I buy a game is see if I can disable the HUD. Can I turn off the HUD? Not just because I want to take screenshots, it's definitely a big part of it, but because maybe I want to play without the minimap. Maybe I want to play without all these markers. It really should just be mandatory, in my opinion, especially for these sort of immersive sim open world experiences. I want to have that option. I frankly am demanding it at this point, and I love that Thief was doing it back in 2014, and that it has clearly been an influence in the industry, because again, we're seeing it with more and more games. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of these games are actually designed around this concept. I mean, you got to remember the people making these games, I think at the end of the day, that's the kind of game they want to play. They want to have that player freedom, they want to have that player choice, but there's this never-ending drive from the business side of it to absorb as large of an audience as possible, and therefore there's this push to make the game as accessible as possible, even if it's more accessible than it needs to be in all of the wrong ways. I'm all for actual accessibility, ensuring that people with disabilities can experience a game. This is something that the Forza franchise has done spectacularly well, with the different sort of assists for driving for people who maybe don't have hands that work that well. My dad has severe nerve damage in his hands from working in working hard life, factory life, right? And that game allows him to actually sit down and comfortably play for maybe a couple hours, whereas a game without those sorts of assists, his hands are toast after 10 minutes. So I get that, but that's not a lot of what we're seeing in games. We're just seeing, hey, let me tell you how to do everything because we feel you can't figure out how to walk from one point to the other, and we don't want you to enjoy personal discovery. So again, it seems like the games are actually designed to be played with a lot of these things turned off, and as soon as you turn off like the HUD and the marker system in Assassin's Creed Origins, all of a sudden it feels like a completely different game. It feels like, wow, this is the game they were trying to build. So massive kudos to Thief for being one of those games making that stuff happen. Let's talk a little bit about its development cycle. It's really plain and simple with Thief. It was just in development for a very long time across what would eventually end up being multiple pieces of hardware. So Thief was originally, the Thief reboot was originally announced as a sequel, Thief 4, back in 2009. A long time ago. I can actually remember playing Minecraft on a server with some friends, and one of our friends was obsessed with Thief, like OG Thief fan, played all the old games, was really excited when he heard that Thief 4 was coming out, so he recreated like his own city for us to play Thief in. And he had his little thief skin on his Minecraft character. It was like the best thing ever, and that was like, okay, I'm interested in this game. Unfortunately, it wasn't until 2013 that we would finally find out the game was in fact a reboot for the series. So the game would essentially move forward. We're in this new location called The City, which is basically just a dark fantasy world with lots of gothic and Victorian inspiration, but you would take control of Garrett the Master Thief once again, and that's kind of where things would go. The problem along the way, mainly here, was that it started development on Unreal Engine 3. I think it could have moved to Unreal Engine 4, but it never did, and it also was just originally planned for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but then suddenly Xbox One and PlayStation 4 are on the horizon. Obviously, the developers knew about this long before we knew about it as a consumer, and they were like, well, it looks like we got to start, developing for that platform as well. So now they're dealing with new hardware technologies, new software, and I think that actually led to a lot of the issues with the lack of complexity or lack of player freedom when it comes to the design of many of the locations in the city. It's one of the biggest pet peeves that I have with the game, and that I know many long-standing Thief fans have with the game, is that the player freedom for how you take on a heist or a mission in this game just isn't anywhere near the level it was with OG Thief. And that's kind of disappointing, because we're like, well, we're, like 10, 20 years later now. Why don't we have more freedom? I think there was a period in time where they were just so caught up in just making the game work probably, and not to mention actually building out the city and making it really rich and loaded with atmosphere, which they did an amazing job of, by the way. This is a really fun environment to just spend time in, but along the way they just didn't get to bake in all of those different routes that we wanted to see. Even the most complex of missions in Thief 2014 have like maybe 2 or 3 different ways that they can be tackled. That player freedom just really isn't there all the way. Nonetheless, though, it's still a really solid stealth game, and because of that customizable difficulty, it has an absurd amount of replayability. You can do a basic playthrough on the easier difficulty, get a hang of the game, get a hang for some of the locations, and then go back and maybe decide, okay, well, now let's turn off the HUD settings all off, and let's disable upgrades. Let's do a run with no upgrades and just do it with the base tools that I get in the game as I progress. Just a lot of ways to go back and do it all over again. Honestly, my favorite thing about the game, though, is its atmosphere. Like, it's just a game about stealing stuff at the end of the day. Yeah, there's a greater story, but the core gameplay revolves around you just looting everything in sight. So being able to do that in a city that is really rich with like fog and good weather effects, the lighting is fantastic in this game, great music. I think the sense of the Victorian sort of gothic inspirations are just seen everywhere, and that just brings it together in a very unique way. When you first start playing the game, it kind of feels like Dishonored, but the more you progress through it, it really starts to stand out as its own dark fantasy world, and I really got lost in that when I was playing Thief. It was probably my favorite part of the game, and it wasn't until I finished it that I was able to look back and realize all of the flaws the game had, because I was just kind of caught up in the moment. And I think that's good game design, right? When one thing can kind of cover up a bunch of other things that could potentially ruin the experience. First and foremost, with one of those things that could and likely ruins the experience for a lot of people, is just the way you actually loot stuff in this game. Like, if I had to pick out one sort of final thing to say about Thief that I absolutely loathed, like that I wish they could go back and do all over again, I wish somebody could mod and fix, it's how looting in this game works. So Garrett's concept, his sort of words of wisdom as a thief is, it's not how much you steal, it's what you steal. Unfortunately, he never once follows his own morals, his own wisdom. In fact, in the game, all you do is just loot everything from a tiny, gold letter opener to something worth 500 gold. It's like he doesn't have enough of these letter openers. I need 300 gold letter openers at 3 gold apiece. What I wish they would have done, the one thing I always thought would have worked really well in this game, was to have an encumberment system. So have a max weight that the character can actually carry, that the player can actually carry. And therefore, each item weighs more or less, and then also has its own value. So a player might say to themselves, well, yeah, I could take these 3 goblets with me, these pewter goblets, or silver goblets that are worth, 10 gold apiece, or I could wait for a larger item that maybe weighs more than all 3 of these goblets put together, but that is worth much more than all 3 of these goblets. Make the player have to pick and choose, and make them make sacrifices on what they take and don't take. Make them think to themselves, but maybe there's something larger in here later on in the mission. And hell, what if you even got to the point where, you're at the end of the mission and you're about to steal this main piece of loot, and all of a sudden you have to now look at your inventory and say, well, in order to take this final piece of treasure that's worth like 1,000 gold or 1,500 gold, I've got to take a look at my inventory and do some management here. Maybe that's not something they wanted to have in that game, that level of inventory management, but honestly I think most people who played OG Thief would have actually been into that system. I know I would have. I think that's an extra layer of depth that I would have really genuinely enjoyed. Like, oh, okay, wait a second. Well, you know, there's a good chance I might get, let's just dump all of these and let's take this and we'll see what we get towards the end of the mission. Because the concept of just having to check every single drawer, every single cabinet, every single, you know, little ottoman in chest, and it's just, it got so old so fast. After the first hour of playing Thief, you were going to be tired of crouching and standing and crouching and standing to check the 10 different drawers that exist in every single desk, inside of every single room, inside of every single house, inside of this city. It is easily, in my opinion, the game's biggest flaw, even larger than that of its lack of real player choice when it comes to how you tackle a mission. Now, when I say lack of player choice, you can actually play this game lethal or non-lethal. You do eventually give some tools that allow you to take down enemies and just eliminate them entirely. But honestly, it just always played better to me as a non-lethal experience. In fact, I kind of wish they would have forced the player to play non-lethal. That would have been an extra layer of difficulty. And again, I know you can just enable that option if you want to. But it was one of those situations where I was like, why not just make it a requirement, you know? At least on like every difficulty except easy, because again, Garrett's whole ideology is like, I don't kill. It would have been cool to see a situation where the player is forced to fall in line with the character's morals, rather than being able to alter that character's morals literally like 2 minutes after the character just clearly defines and says, I don't kill without thought. I don't kill for no reason. But the rest of the game in Thief 2014, you can kill without reason a lot if you want to. Again, I get the idea of player freedom, but I feel like sometimes restricting the player actually has more value than absolute player freedom. It's kind of getting old, right? That selling point of player freedom. I think we need to understand when player freedom is being implemented properly and when it's just there for the sake of player freedom. That all being said, guys, I still absolutely recommend Thief 2014. Again, really replayable experience, really adaptable, customizable experience. It's just a lot of fun. You know, for all of the issues that I've stated here and the way the loot system works, it doesn't make it not a good game. I think it has a relatively enjoyable story. It's not like super original or out there, but it's just a fun place to be. That's probably my biggest thing when I think about a game and whether or not I enjoyed it at the end of the day. It's like, did I have fun being in that game's world? Because games are, regardless of who you are and why you play, a bit of escapism, right? They're taking us to a different place, a different point in time. And I think Thief does a good job at allowing us to escape to the city as Master Thief Garrett. So check it out. It's on like every platform under the sun, extremely cheap these days. And of course, if you guys have any first-hand experiences with the reboot of Thief, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below why you loved it, why you didn't love it, what you would have liked to see them do differently, and maybe what you'd like to see them do if they ever continue this reboot with a sequel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.